Matha, how are we, buddy? You okay?
Hi. Yeah, I'm great, thanks, Rob. Glad to be chatting with you. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate you taking the time out in terms of chatting to us. To be honest with you, because I know we met nearly a year ago. You came down obviously for our conference in 2023, and I think I mentioned to you the night before the conference we were going to do a podcast, and you were one of the people I wanted to get on. So finally we're here. So yeah, really appreciate it. So you are in Vancouver at the minute, yeah?
Yeah, thanks for having me at the conference last year. It was great to join you all. Really great event, and yeah, lovely to see so many friendly faces, friends new and old. Yeah, I'm in Vancouver at the moment. I've been here for almost a couple of months, and yeah, spring, so that's quite nice. And we've got the beach a stone's throw from here, so it'll be nice to get down there when the weather gets a bit better.
Yeah. Yeah, I am a little bit jealous. Mate, I'm gonna go in big and I'm gonna go in hard straight away, all right.
Uh-oh.
So so in terms of so obviously your book that you wrote, Should We Legalize All Drugs? What's your answer to that?
It's a tricky one, really. I sort of fudged my response towards the end, but broadly speaking, yeah, I would say that the drug policies cause more harm than the drugs themselves in terms of drug prohibition.
Yeah.
Whether that's, drug supply being contaminated with fentanyl or other like adulterants, which are broadly included because there's no regulation, and B, so people can make larger profits. And obviously that could happen within a legal market, but if there was adequate regulation, as I say, it's doubtful. And if certain drugs were more available, let's say, the demand for other more dangerous drugs like fentanyl, like crack, like methamphetamine would very likely drop considerably.
Okay.
So yeah, and then on the like softer end of the spectrum, cannabis has been legalized in various jurisdictions now, including where I am now, and the world hasn't fallen in. Clearly, yeah, it's not a bad thing for the high street, and yeah, people smoke weed like on out and about, and seems like it's a far better option for their health, and if they do want to do something to take the edge off than drinking alcohol. A new study recently suggested actually that cannabis legalization here is linked to a drop in alcohol sales, so I think that's good for public health.
But when we met each other, you kind of asked me that question, like, should we legalize all drugs? And my response was probably quite brash, and I was kind of just like, yeah, why not? Do you know? And ultimately, your response was, what, even GHB? And it kind of got me thinking then, do you know, in terms of actually, yeah, it's just a much bigger debate in terms of, just very simple yes or no. And actually, like you said, with certain drugs, maybe there does need to be a little bit of a different approach. But going back to what you said, so if there was, for example, the likes of cannabis and powder cocaine and stuff like that, then actually any demands for kind of substances like fentanyl or methamphetamine, that would naturally reduce then? Is that kind of what you meant by that?
That's what many people, commentators and experts do say. Like the crack sales are wrapped up in the illegal market. It was basically invented by drug dealers, and it gets sold alongside heroin. Yeah, I'm not saying that it would necessarily disappear overnight, but I think it's a
Yeah.
product of the illegal market, and it is quite plausible that sales would really, really drop off, especially if people had access to less harmful stimulants to get that high. And yeah, the GHB thing, I guess I was taking a bit of a devil's advocate position.
Yeah.
Because it's obviously been stigmatized as a date rape drug. I've only used GHB once, but it's like a liquid ecstasy generally, and I think if you do take a lot, you'll black out, and it's also like an aphrodisiac and a very like sensual feeling on the body.
Yeah.
But plenty of people enjoy it, and at the end of the day, if it's legally regulated, then you're going to see the strength, you're going to see the quantity, and you're going to have far more of an idea. But yeah, I'm not suggesting it's should be like as part of a retail model, or even like, you know, easily accessible through a kind of necessarily like a more pharmacy or harm reduction kind of, you needed like a consultation and then they assess whether, you know, you should have access to X, Y, or Z. These are the really, you know, difficult questions that it's interesting that we're actually discussing at this time, because it's more about like, well, drugs are being legalized. How should we do it? What's the safest way to do it? And yeah, just looking at this text I got from a recent drug dealer, she's got a whole pharmacy. Like, I've never seen anything like this before. She's selling gabapentin. She's got GHB right at the top of the list, hydromorphine, fentanyl, shrooms, dexedrine, caviar sauce vape pens, diazepam, Xanax, San Pedro, peyote, DMT pens, kratom, changa, cocaine, crack, uncapped moonrock, MDMA, crack pipes. You know, and there's plenty that I've left out. Like,
yeah.
I'm sure she's, you know, doing better than many others, I understand, in terms of her reputation and like the quality of her substances, her products. But at the end of the day, do we want to be leaving it in the hands of people, you know, communicating over text message just with, you know, 4 words description for each of their products? I'm sure she'd share more if I asked, but look,
Yeah.
there's an overwhelming demand, a growing demand as the global middle class expands for all of these drugs. Let's look at the evidence and consider the safest way to cater to this, frankly, natural human desire to change their consciousness and yeah, get high.
Yeah, and I think that's something like from the articles that you've written over the years and the ones that I've read, you know, you've clearly stated that actually it's kind of like a human instinct, isn't it? You know, in terms of to experience alternative sensations, alternative kind of realities, you know, and like you said, that kind of to experience some sort of a high. So in one way, it probably seems a little bit odd to criminalize ultimately a human instinct. And obviously how I see it ultimately is that at the minute, especially in the UK, they said, okay, well, these drugs are okay and these are bad, but they're kind of just giving you that little bit in terms of giving those drugs that are okay, but you know, just to kind of to keep the majority satisfied with the whole process, you know. And I'm sure if they wanted to, you know, the big wigs could kind of pull or kind of add certain substances to keep the majority of the population kind of satisfied with how things are and not necessarily result in like an uprising, you know, that they want certain drugs kind of like legalized. Do you find, though, in terms of if we are to legalize substances, that it has to be actually on a more wider scale, in terms of a more global scale, rather than individual countries to work? And I ask that in terms of, you've got kind of narco states, you've got narco corruption going on in certain countries. And actually, if, say, we were to legalize all drugs in the UK, that kind of criminalization aspect of it, when you're looking at, say, for example, the protection of cocaine in Colombia and various South American countries, that's still going to go ahead. So actually, to look at the harms of drugs as a whole, actually it needs to be a bigger conversation among many countries rather than individual ones doing their own thing.
Absolutely. Well, firstly, the double standard is obviously incredible in terms of the availability of alcohol, tobacco, and pharmaceutical drugs, some of which are addictive and some of which are the same drugs that aren't available otherwise, and that kill people in no small number from misuse and because of they're fundamentally addictive, so people develop harmful patterns of use. But then I think it's definitely useful to take like a global view of this whole question, because the drug trade is globalized, and if someone takes cocaine in London, that I guess does have an impact on people's lives in Colombia and elsewhere in Latin America. Talking Drugs just put out something on their newsletter that I was reading. It was like a report from Manaus in the Amazonian jungle in Brazil, and they were saying something like how the narco traffickers are just in like a pitched battle with the army and pirates.
Okay, they're still going today.
Yeah, there's pirates still going, trying to, I guess, get the narco traffickers to walk the plank and just leave them their bounty of drugs and money. And then the drug traffickers and the pirates apparently are raiding some of the villages. So what you've got here is just a really like anarchic situation that shows no sign of letting up, really, because of the global demand for cocaine and poverty in those producer countries, meaning that selling coca is a viable option. There's in Vancouver here, like a coca leaf cafe and medicinal mushroom dispensary. And they've got a variety of Peruvian and Bolivian coca products. They've got leaves, got powder. They sell like cocachinos in the store. Okay. And I understand they source it directly, I guess, from an ethical source. And then they sell it to consumers here in Canada. The only thing is, I suppose, is that at the moment the sales aren't taxed because it's illegal, but it seems to be like broadly tolerated by the authorities. Before cannabis legalization here, there was a number of illegal cannabis dispensaries that were just sort of pushing the limits of the law in anticipation of changes later down the line to kind of reflect the broader culture change that there's been in relation to the use and visibility of such substances in daily life. But to get to my point, is it such a bad thing that one drinks like a cocaccino that's no stronger really than a strong cup of coffee? I wouldn't say it is, and that's a way to rid these communities to a large extent of these pernicious influences from the drug trade. I'm not saying that some of these gangs wouldn't move into other industries, let's say, but the drug trade has given them an unrivaled bounty to fight over and develop their capabilities, their weaponry, and all sorts. There's nothing that rivals that in terms of value, the drug trade. So to take away that from the gangs and put it into the coffers of the state, the taxes instead, isn't ideal, because the state isn't necessarily using our tax dollars for fantastic social justice products at home and around the world. But yeah, I would say it would be an improvement.
I was going to ask in terms of that from a regulatory model, and obviously from the extensive amount of research you've done across the world, really, around just drugs generally. Like, yeah, who would be best fit to oversee that regulatory model? Because, like you said, I think many would probably gear towards the state kind of overseeing it, but then I guess you have to consider the country and how the state is ultimately performing in those countries. I'm sure there's many people in the UK that would probably have a quite strong counter argument that they wouldn't necessarily want the government to be in more financial power, in relation, especially surrounding substances. So then, does the question come in around big farmers? But then obviously you look at ultimately what's happened in North America around, the impact and the influence of big farmers, especially around like OxyContin and that, being the origins of the opioid crisis that they see there. And obviously, you're at the heartbeat really in terms of in British Columbia associated to that. So where do you see it being best in relation to who oversees a regulatory model?
Yeah, well, there's another interesting project here, the Drug User Liberation Front, led by two people primarily. And yeah, broadly what they were doing was selling tested amounts of hard drugs at ethical cost prices to ensure, right, that people weren't taking large amounts of fentanyl and yeah, anything else that might lead them to a fatal overdose. And so yeah, that seems to have worked for a year or two, and then they got raided by the police and arrested, but they haven't been charged. But they're leading a judicial review that's currently being considered by the authorities, and they're basically saying that the removal of their ability to provide such a service violates the Constitution, because it's likely to put people in greater harm that they didn't have access to this. And there was no regulatory body checking up on them. I guess in a sense they're regulated by the community, and the testing that they were doing, it speaks for itself. Look, if we've got this relatively pure drug and we're selling it at this reasonable price, here you go, and people can kind of vote with their money in a way, and their choices, they can go there or not. So that's one potential model that could be seen under a decriminalisation, wider kind of model, right? If there's decrim, then it would allow broadly folks to do such things. And then on the other hand, you could have a regulatory model with more like more checks from the state, and a chap with a clipboard going around every 3 months, like maybe. But yeah, if you look at the way that the pharmaceutical industry has to some extent captured the regulatory process, at least in Western countries, that obviously gives people a lot of anxiety. But it's the best thing we've got, right? So
I guess you weigh up in terms of what we currently see with organized crime and the implications, like you mentioned in your book, prime example being Mexico and the impact it's had in Mexico and the amount of fatalities that have occurred due to the drug war there. But then kind of balance that in terms of who would oversee a certain regulatory kind of model.
At the end of the day, at the end of the day, big pharma, like they aren't like fighting pitched battles in the street against each other, like, you know, Pfizer and AstraZeneca, or nor their proxies like scuffling in the streets of Liverpool,
Yeah.
right? Like they do their business in courtrooms, and you know, there's questions to be asked there actually about like the transparency of some of these corporate arbitration courts. But yeah, it's whatever's happening there is insulating our society from like actual physical violence between gangs that are kind of fighting over the paracetamol market, because yeah, the desire for paracetamol is widely met at a reasonable price by legal entities. So there's just no interest, I suppose, for like criminals to get involved in selling paracetamol.
Yeah. Do you know, in terms of, say, let's say where you are, Canada or the UK, they did legalize cocaine, for example. How would that work then in terms of where they source that cocaine from? Would they have to ultimately collaborate with the organized crime in South America, or would they have other pathways in place?
I mean, cocaine is already used in medicine, and I understand that companies source it directly from like the Peruvian government. The Peruvian government have got like a body, a state body that regulates coca sales, and also for Coca-Cola. And then so when Coca-Cola buy like X amount of coca leaves from Peru, I think they take it to like a factory or somewhere in America and extract the cocaine, which used to be in the drink, isn't anymore.
Yeah, yeah.
And now they sell the cocaine effectively to a pharmaceutical company. So
Okay.
that it's already happening, and there's companies such as one aptly called Safe Supply in Canada that are already kind of planning to do sort of coca drinks
Okay.
in much the same way as this Coca Leaf Cafe, but I think like sort of carbonated beverages. And they're just waiting for a change in the law, and they've already got, you know, various import permits.
Okay.
So yeah, this is all happening, and yeah, I think it's incumbent on the state to really act and do something, but because these companies are already circling, and they're feeling that they can act with some degree of freedom due to the wider cultural changes, as I mentioned. So yeah, now's the time really, and yeah, it's kind of wild that yeah, I'm talking about this subject now. I mean, I was approached to write this book off the back of articles I'd written, mostly on medical cannabis for Vice and the Guardian, and yeah, here I am now. I guess I never sought to be like a kind of spokesperson or advocate. It just seems to me that, you know, the change is afoot, and you know, the best way to deal with it is to introduce evidence-based laws to keep people as safe as possible. And yeah, I've tried some of these coca drinks and still here today.
You look like you're doing well, to be fair, Mattha, after those. So yeah, why not?
Yeah, obviously, if I was putting, you know, tons of cocaine up my nose, which I don't, it might be a different story.
Yeah.
And it's clearly like an extremely addictive drug that creates dependence. So we need to be careful about this. It's not a trivial matter.
No.
But the thing is just that, you know, at the moment, anyone who can get it like that anyway, and half of the stuff is like cut with all sorts of other drugs that you know aren't going to do anyone any good, and actually just risk their health even more. You know, if it's all cut with like methamphetamine or, you know, different kinds of bits to weigh it down, like cement powder or like tons of like, you know, paracetamol or something, and caffeine. You know, actually pure cocaine, as long as you're not taking tons of it, is much safer than what's being sold as cocaine at the moment.
Yeah, that's definitely something we're seeing in Wales, you know, in terms of obviously you'll know in terms of like netazines, and we find netazines within, you know, what are labeled and sold as Valium samples, so non-opioid based drugs, you know, and yeah, you got all sorts of adulterants and dilutants that's found in kind of substances. One thing I did want to kind of say to like ask you about is it's like right at the start of your book, you know, that you said that there's very few words in the English language that ultimately has the capacity to shock people and to maybe get a wide variety of responses. And ultimately, drugs is one of those very few words. What I guess in terms of what I wanted to ask you is why do you think that is? Because you know you talk about in terms of people taking cocaine and actually that there's you know there's a good percentage of people that you know will take cocaine, you know, and there's a good percentage of people that will take a wide variety of illegal drugs, but it's the minority, you know, that ultimately become potentially dependent upon it. So the vast majority of people who use illicit drugs don't experience dependency. They use it for, on the whole, potentially some beneficial purpose, you know, and obviously that will be different from person to person. And like you mentioned, you know, around prescribed medications, they're all drugs, alcohol's drugs, paracetamol, caffeine, you know, we can go on. You know, I always say everyone's a drug user. You know, you know, kids are drug users, you know, they're taking Calpol, you know, or stuff like that at the end of the day. So why do you think drugs is a word that does stem fear, stigma, shock, to name just a few?
So much is changing so quickly, to be honest with you. I think even since I wrote that, maybe the term drugs is losing a bit of its stigma. And I only recently discovered that there's like a chain of pharmacy stores here in BC called London Drugs.
Okay.
So I took a photo the other day on my Instagram. But yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? It's like a kind of dichotomy between like good drugs and bad drugs. But yeah, if you just shouted like drugs in the street, people would look at you weird. Maybe they would always like look at you weird, like if you just like suddenly shouted something in the street. But you know, I would say that you know there's like drugs, bomb, or like any sort of like racial slur or epithet or like swear word. You know, there's not that many that would like really provoke like a real like look. But I mean, maybe some people would kind of like smirk and just give you a sort of knowing like wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Yeah, I've got mine, mate. But I think like broadly speaking, because of the, like also the demonization of drugs and the war on drugs and just it being tarred with this whole just like sense of dread and kind of illicitness and like yeah, it's just like drugs. Like psychedelics, I suppose, has like a different kind of verve to it. Like even when you say it, or just in like you know popular representations of it. But yeah, I think like I guess like yeah, I don't know. Drugs is maybe losing its stigma, but I think it really does. Yes, hold like yeah capacity to shock. It's like if you say drugs, it's like drugs. Like what drugs? Like, I don't know. Maybe it is because we're all taking them. I haven't taken anything yet today. I did put a bit of honey in my tea, which yeah, it was also like you know gonna like when it goes through my body, it will just act like sugar basically and give me a little bit of a boost.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're really unpacking what it means to be a drug right now, I think, in like general like discourse. And yeah, it's just fundamentally very weird that you can have like a big store called London Drugs, but then, you know, in like at least general like mass media, yeah, representations of drugs. It's like when you say drugs, it's like illegal drugs, but then suddenly something else referring to drugs is more just about like pharmaceutical drugs. So it kind of doesn't really even make sense. I think it comes from the Dutch root word for dry goods, like droog or something.
Okay.
When the first like sober intoxicants were coming to the Western world, like tobacco, chocolate, that sort of thing. I guess alcohol is also a drug, and that's pretty wet.
I would highly recommend your book. It's I think you put quite complex ideas, situations into quite really easy read, to be honest with you. And yeah, I read it in one sitting. You know, I just flew through it, and yeah, it was really kind of educational as well. You know, I really enjoy kind of learning about the history of drugs, and you know, you kind of got a really good section around that. And yeah, I would definitely kind of recommend to anybody really, especially who work within the substance field as well, to have a read of it. It's not too long, which I like in terms of books as well. So, but yeah, on the topic around like should all yeah legalize in drugs. Do you know you based yourself in Mexico for a few years, you know, and obviously you're in Vancouver and you've been to the US, and you know you've been to so many different places across the world. Do you feel that, and I know you've already alluded to it, but do you feel it is changing, and that actually it's only a matter of time now where we see quite a few countries actually moving towards whether it is decriminalisation or even legalization of the majority of drugs?
Well, thanks very much for the kind words about the book. Yeah, it's only about 20,000 words. It's a nice thing for the coffee table, I suppose. That is, it's really well illustrated. There's you know various photos on every page. And I
Lots
guess
of
it's
pictures, Nathan. I like it.
yeah, yeah. I guess it's part of them. It reflects the
Yeah.
fact, you know, that a big publisher like Thames and Hudson would want to put something out like that. That yeah, the topic is being mainstreamed, and we're having a debate now, which I think is long overdue. You know, if people want to read more kind of in depth about the topic, yeah, I'd really recommend like Anthony Lowenstein's Pills, Powder, and Smoke, or Nico Vorobkov's Dope World, which I read recently and really enjoyed. In terms of the winds of change in the US, the FDA is likely to approve MDMA assisted therapy for PTSD in August.
Okay.
So that's just coming around the bend. You've got pilot projects for cocaine sales in Switzerland, I believe, in one city. Amsterdam is finally trialing legal weed sales, because it's always, the coffee shops have always actually sourced their weed from the illegal market.
Yeah.
Australia is already kind of rolling out, you know, various psychedelic treatments. And as all of this keeps happening, the industry, the psychedelic industry, is going to grow in value and strength and influence. And as I mentioned before, there's companies emerging that want to deal in legal sales of cocaine products, basically, and other related drugs. So yeah, when the money gets behind it, now the shackles are off. I think it only ends up in one, going in one direction.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I attended the Harm Reduction International Conference last year, and it was really interesting. There was a presentation around the cannabis market in Canada, and from what I got from it was that the idea when they were going to introduce the legal market in Canada was that it wasn't as going to be there wasn't going to be as much discrepancy in terms of those who were the victims ultimately of prohibition, to those that didn't really see much impact. Ultimately, it was a race situation, and actually that discrepancy hasn't changed, and like colonialization ultimately still has a massive part to play, not just in society generally, especially within those countries that um, were inflicted by it, but within kind of drug policy as well. And it'd be interesting, if things were to change, and as you alluded to, they are changing, whether the impact of colonialization will start to hopefully reduce. But for me, and as well, I think there are different countries that still got a long way to go. Like Harm Reduction International released not so long ago. I think it was like a couple of weeks ago, actually, one of their reports that nearly half of executions worldwide were due to drug offences. Iran being the main player really in that. And that equated to around 467 people were executed for drug offences in 2023, and that number's gone up from 30 in 2020. It's been a massive increase really. And obviously there's various other countries that still partake in ultimately that punishment, which there's still a long ways to go, and in various countries with it. But you alluded to psychedelics, Matha. I'm thoroughly enjoying your podcast. I'm more than happy to promote your podcast, Unchartered Territory. My favorite episode, I think it was episode 2 with Mike J on High Society. What a man! What a listen, like, with him. But what interested you around psychedelics? Because I see you as probably, especially from a media perspective, but just generally within in terms of the substance use world, as probably one of the leading people around psychedelics. If I see something that you write, then it's something I feel is going to be of good quality and something that's going to educate myself more. So why is psychedelics it seems to me the one that's really pulled you, in terms of specific type of substance?
Yeah, well, thanks very much for checking out the podcast. I've really enjoyed making it. I've taken a bit of a pause for the moment because I feel like I probably need to put a bit more into the promotion and the planning of it if I'm really to do it justice. But it's been a great ride so far, and yeah, I really enjoyed speaking to Mike J. Yeah, what a font of knowledge. Yeah, he really gets it, and yeah, he's really lived it. Like he knows it. He's been everywhere, and yeah, what a life. Great man, great guy. So yeah, I mean, there's a long way to go as well. Just to return to your previous point about legalization and reform around the world, like no doubt, and the apparatus of the drug war still remains. I don't want to look at it with rose-tinted glasses. Even recently here in Canada, I spoke to a guy who got raided by a SWAT team for getting like a ceremony's worth of ayahuasca delivered to his house.
Wow.
And yeah, people are obviously still getting arrested for drug offences, and those people, generally tend to be people of color and the people who are more disadvantaged in society. So yeah, there's tons more we need to do there. And actually, like, yeah, the companies that are now kind of making money in the space could perhaps devote some of their efforts to wider reform movements. In terms of psychedelics, yeah, I've experienced their capacity for healing, I suppose. Like I would say that as a result of using psychedelics in ritualized and medicalized settings, and indeed like in recreational settings, I'm a better person. Like, and I'm like my mind is quieter. I have a more kind of expansive outlook on the world, and as a result, I've don't drink and don't smoke, and have really got deeper into yoga and meditation. Obviously, I've had some like tricky experiences with psychedelics as well. And yeah, the whole point of what I'm doing, I suppose, is to like help people not make the same mistakes, I guess, that I perhaps did in terms of, you just taking too much in the wrong setting or with the wrong people. So it's all just about like increasing education. And I see psychedelics as, yeah, potentially just a whole class of medicines that can really help move society in the right direction, bring people together. Indeed, cannabis also can have that effect. And yeah, just for people to enjoy spending time together without drinking, which is something just obviously, harmful to people's health. Obviously, a few pints here and there is fine, but on the whole, especially in the UK, which has such a drinking culture, I think it's long overdue that we have other options when we want to sort of come together as a group and enjoy like a social elixir. Mike J's very interested in kava, which is like this root brew from the South Pacific. And it has a very similar effect to alcohol, but without any of the health risks.
Oh,
I know
okay.
that David Nutt is working on Sentia spirits as well, which is,
Yeah.
yeah, that also I tried it recently, kind of works on similar like receptors in the brain as alcohol. So I think it's great that serious alternatives to alcohol are coming around the bend, and people are making better choices, and that there's therapies emerging for PTSD and other mental health conditions that, frankly, the medical establishment has failed to address, and many of the current treatment options that actually seem to do more harm than good in many cases.
Yeah, I think, when you look at like prescribed medications, that's probably one of the biggest issues that we see in the UK, you know. But I think flipping it back in terms of with psychedelics, what really, I would say my knowledge around psychedelics is not great, if I'm brutally honest with you. And I think what, specifically with your podcast, what is shown to me is actually how much of a role or different role psychedelics can play in different parts of life, whether it's in terms of, part of wellness retreats, whether it's in terms of, sex, for example, whether it's in terms of treatment around mental health issues. Obviously one of your episodes is, quite a fascinating listen around machete kind of surgery in terms of, I can't remember what that guy's name was, but so yeah, there's loads going on, which it kind of just shows that there's no boundaries really to psychedelics to a degree.
Yeah, they are everywhere. They grow naturally.
Mhm.
Like some have been created in labs, some have long been here anyway. And I guess the point of the podcast is to kind of unpack the psychedelic experience and show the way that they are transforming society in so many different ways, whether that's like couples therapy. And yeah, traditionally couples therapy has, had like many successes, but there's a very high rate of, yeah, not having success. And it seems that yes, psychedelic assisted couples therapy may well return far greater results. Like if couples who are in a rut go on like a little experience together with a therapist and take a dose of a psychedelic, and then they can really like speak frankly and let whatever was weighing them down off in a way that talking therapy just doesn't do, or can take a very long time to do. The machete episode, I don't actually think he's taken any psychedelics, at least in the furtherance of his job. There's basically like a, a shamanic doctor or like auric healer in Cuba, and it seems that he kind of does enter some sort of altered state, but I don't know how he necessarily does it. Like he hasn't got like a sort of Siberian shaman stood there like banging a drum so he can enter a trance. It seems actually that he just swigs like a whole bottle of rum and then somehow can just enter this state where he's like possibly even possessed, and uses like, you know, machete, like a really obviously just like a really rudimentary instrument, and removes like growths from his patients that then can kind of release some whatever tension might have been occurring for them. I mean, I haven't been there,
Yeah.
but you know, the Daily Mail have covered this guy. Reuters have sent people to take photos. This guy's got a queue of people like lining up around the block every day. Like if he was doing something really awful, I think A, the Cuban authorities would probably shut him down, and B, people wouldn't be queuing up every day for years for this chap to help them out. I mean, it sounds really out there, like how I'm describing it, but you know, I'm happy for someone to kind of prove me wrong if it is some sort of sleight of hand. But yeah, at the end of the day, there are extraordinary phenomena that goes on like in life, and it's not necessarily some sleight of hand when you see a qigong master somehow conjure enough energy to set a piece of paper alight with his hand. Like I think Sky did a documentary that included a clip of the very same thing happening. So yeah, you don't necessarily need to eat magic mushrooms to see extraordinary things that happen that maybe don't fit into our like rationalist framework. But there's an incredible natural world out there, and yeah, if we go out with an open mind, then yeah, we may well be surprised from time to time.
One of the things I wanted to pick up is from the episode with Mike J, actually, you know, and kind of you guys were discussing that ultimately some people may see the use of psychedelics from whether it be a treatment or a well-being perspective, they have a different perspective to actually what it may turn out to be, in that the experience could actually be I think the terminology you used was that it could actually be an ordeal for people, and actually the benefits come from the fact that those individuals actually get through that ordeal. So it's not necessarily the experience, from what I got from it anyway, in terms of what you guys were talking about. It's not actually the experience that is like the be all and end all from a benefits perspective, but it was actually the fact that people were able to get through it, and they could actually tell themselves, do you know what, I can actually do that, and I can do more than what I actually anticipated. Is that something that's quite common, would you say, or is it kind of obviously very individual dependent in terms of, you know, whether it's the kind of the benefit comes from after, or the benefit comes from the actual experience itself?
Bad trips or challenging experiences perhaps, yeah, it can be very transformative and allow people to face themselves and whatever's going on in their mind. And the question is just whether that container in which that they've had that experience has held them and hasn't like been a sort of chaotic space that has then, you know, given them sort of external stimuli that stress them out and has not allowed them to kind of really like surrender, I suppose, to that deep healing experience that they're having. That's not to say people can't have like, you know, challenging trips that actually do lead to like serious issues down the line, because that totally happens too, and we need to be really aware of that in like designing the best like treatment plans possible.
How was the darkness retreat? So you spent 6 days, was it, in a pitch black room where you literally just had a bed, toilet, and like literally a hatch where you got your 2 meals a day. And I remember reading that article and you were experiencing quite natural highs. I think you said it was similar to like DMT, was it? Like, first of all, how was that in terms of spending 6 days without no light whatsoever? And did you get what you wanted from it?
I guess I was just super interested in the idea of spending an extended period of time without any like distractions, I suppose. The American footballer Aaron Rodgers, who credited his last two most valuable player awards, so the best player in, you know, the NFL, he credited ayahuasca with helping him,
No way.
get in such a state that he was the best player in the league 2 years consecutively. And then basically this chap did this darkness retreat and spoke fairly highly of it. And I know other sort of wellness influencers like Aubrey Marcus had done it. And there's a long tradition of its use. The Taoist master Mantak Chia has sort of unearthed long history of its use in Taoist texts. And I know that he puts on like darkness retreats in Southeast Asia, and that's what's partly led to the interest in the Western world. But you know, I'm quite into meditation. Like daily, I do meditate at least for a short period of time, and I'd done meditation retreats before doing the darkness. So there was something about it, and I was just like, this could make for an interesting story and experience for me and for others to read about, as you know, you very kindly have read the article, and it's provoked some questions for you here. In terms of like the feeling of it, for the first day or two, I was like sedate. It was like, you know, my body had finally got the rest, the deep rest that it had been craving for a long time. And you know, my body was kind of flooded with melatonin, the sleep chemical, like naturally, right? Because it gets created from darkness.
Yeah.
And then that kind of just led my limbs and my joints to be like super heavy. And really it was quite uncomfortable. Like I didn't have the energy to like stretch it out, and I couldn't really summon the strength to do so, partly because it was like my joints were like so heavy, but for the most part, it was a very blissful experience. And come like day 3, day 4, I was experiencing a natural high. Some people suggest that a form of DMT is endogenous to the body, so it's created within us.
Okay.
The research is disputed, but there was some kind of like altered state that I was in quite naturally from the darkness and from not having like external stimuli and interaction with others. And yeah, it really allowed me to like collect my thoughts and process some really deep stuff. I guess I would recommend it. I think that folks should dip their toe in the water, and I wouldn't do it without having like a meditation practice. Maybe just try it for a night first, and softly. But yeah, I think, look, there's a mental health crisis throughout the world, throughout the West, and to get out of it, we're going to have to consider some alternative means to do it. And I'm interested in experiencing those for myself and highlighting them and just showing that if we look outside the box, there's so much that's possible.
Your mate did what, 49 days, was it?
Yeah, a girl I know did 49 days at the same place. I know, like,
that's crazy.
That is pretty crazy. I mean, in the Kogi tribe in Colombia, they send their future like nanas, their shamans, into caves for extended periods of time, and the Buddha would meditate for extended periods in a cave. The Prophet Muhammad got the download like channeled. So the mythology goes, the Quran from spending extended periods of time in a cave.
Oh, okay.
So if you want to contemplate, go somewhere where there's zero distractions and you can really get in touch with yourself and experience the unfolding of pure quiet in the mind, I suppose. 49 days is a lot, though. 49 days is a lot. And I read in the New Yorker, someone did 500 days. Not necessarily in complete darkness, but in a cave. And it didn't sound like that had good like effects necessarily on her. Like, I think she lost some like abilities, I suppose, or like impaired like her like some like physically and perhaps even mentally, according to the story. So like, certainly not suggesting it would be a benefit for like everyone to do like 49 days or 500 days, but I think definitely like a couple of days for a lot of people, might be useful.
Just a bit of time out for a lot of people. I think lives are so busy, for many that I'm not necessarily saying sit in a dark room for however long, but just a bit of time out. I think people need a bit of time to reflect and to recharge, and whatever that looks like for people.
No phone, no phones, no nothing. It was a pure like recharge time. Like I was saying, I think my body just spoke to me pretty clearly. Like I fell asleep immediately, but the moment the light went out, I was out for the count for like 12 hours.
Lovely. That sounds lovely.
It was great. I'm really appreciate the opportunity from Vice to write about it, and the retreat center for having me. I think more darkness.
So you mentioned Vice, Mattha. Obviously Vice announced that they're no longer publishing like fresh content on their websites. Is that true? Is that correct?
That's true. Yeah, that's correct.
So I've always liked Vice because for me it gives like the alternative kind of media stories. It gives you stories that you just wouldn't get from mainstream kind of outlets, and it's kind of and like with a lot of your kind of articles, you're experiencing what you're reporting on, which I think gives a fresh and a unique outlook. I guess in terms of from what you do and obviously colleagues that do similar things, how disappointing is it, with that news from Vice?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a loss in terms of having an outlet that supports certain causes and publish, certain works. But yeah, I mean, there was obviously like big issues at the top of the company and all the way down. So yeah, I mean, there's some great people there, and there's always been like great people there. But yeah, at the end of the day, I'm like a freelance journalist, and yeah, I've never had like a permanent staff job anywhere. So yeah, for me, it's just about connecting with editors and organizations that are interested, in my work and where I'm coming from, and want to sort of adequately remunerate me in the process. And yeah, like some of my first like published work in like mainstream media, which I guess Vice became part of, was like in Canada when I was back here on the other side of the country in Montreal back in 2015. And yeah, Vice published my first like big stories. So yeah, I'll always be grateful for that. But yeah, at the end of the day, like I don't think that they've broadly like treated freelancers or their staff like that well over time.
Okay.
And they clearly made some like big mistakes with different like ventures and like different editorial slants on like certain topics. So yeah, it's like definitely a shame what's happened. But yeah, it's complicated. And yeah, I'm not gonna like sit here and like defend like Vice's like God-given right to exist. But yeah, I mean, I continue to work with them. They're publishing stuff on their Instagram now,
Okay.
and yeah, I'm happy to be part of it. But yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? I mean, like the top bosses still getting bonuses and stuff, while freelancers like me, getting paid comparatively little, yet are producing the stuff that kind of makes Vice Vice. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's difficult. I haven't like commented on it publicly before, I suppose. I mean, Simon Childs wrote a very powerful piece in Novara about the whole thing. But yeah, at the end of the day, like I just have to go, where folks are like gonna publish my stories in the right way. And I can't make too many like judgment decisions about like where it's getting published, I suppose. Like maybe there are some like red lines. More broadly, I'm speaking about like who would publish my work, especially now like Vice aren't really going to be doing so.
The reason why I asked that is, I used to deliver training quite a lot, and I used to use Vice videos quite a bit in those training because it gave just a little bit of a different perspective and stuff like that. So, and
Yeah,
you know,
especially the videos, like some of the reporting from various parts of the world, like conflict zones, subcultures. Yeah, it's a massive loss that they won't be able to produce that content anymore, at least on the scale that they were. Like I worked on one film last year that was off the back of one of my pieces on the like toad venom smoking trend in parts of Mexico, and yeah, that got turned into a film. And yeah, it was a really great experience, like working with folks, and I got paid well, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. I guess that's the thing for me as well. It's like, people are reading less, more stuff's getting published like straight to video. I did a piece recently for the Daily Beast on like these cops at the UN that were calling for access to psychedelic treatments, and I understand people are now interested in kind of turning that into some sort of film off the back of it. So yeah, it's like, but I'm not involved.
Okay.
So for me, it's about like just figuring out how I can have like a long and like, you know, prosperous career, I suppose, working in this field. So all of these questions are coming up.
Before we finish, Mattha, there was one article I wanted to talk to you about, and you may be able to guess what it is, but you broke the news last year. So in 2023, you know, it was the 27-page report from the Advisory Council of the Misuse of Drugs, the ACMD, who are the UK government's main advisors on drugs and drug policy. And that report basically kind of more or less looked at potentially recommending the decriminalisation of possession of drugs in the UK. And this is back in 2016. And ultimately, you know, long story short, the Home Office, even though it was private, as they said, you know, they ultimately tried to keep that document confidential. I know, speaking to you, it was 3-year process, was it, in terms of start to publishing? I guess in terms of one, how was that process, you know, in terms of trying to undertake freedom of information requests, getting, you know, obviously the information for that content, and obviously what happened off the back of it. But from your perception as well, I guess that the other question associated to it, what do you believe is, what are your thoughts on the relationship between the government and its own advisors? Because obviously the ACMD have historically, you know, advised various things of which the government has, you know, obviously just kind of said no, or they've ignored. You know, the ACMD have publicly kind of recommended drug consumption rooms back in 2016. You know, the history around David Nutt back in 2009, you know, and that kind of debacle that happened. So yeah, where do you kind of sit on all of that? So I guess firstly around that kind of that article you released in terms of the ACMD report back in 2016 around the decriminalisation.
Yeah, well, I first got a tip off that there had been a recommendation by the ACMD to decriminalise drugs back in like March 2020, I believe, like at the onset of the pandemic. So I made a freedom of information request, and then yeah, it got turned down, and then just went through the whole process of reviewing it and taking it to the information commissioner, who sided against me. And yeah, that took like 2 years. And during that time, I put out a story with Vice, and then later one with the Times, because it had been mentioned in Parliament as well. Like, I think Diane Abbott raised it in the House of Commons, like Home Affairs Select Committee.
Yeah.
So that kind of made a bit of news. And then I followed up. I basically appealed the information commissioner decision in like a court. I didn't attend the court, but then they made a decision, and subsequently somebody leaked me the report. So then I put out the story that you're mentioning in The Guardian, I think in September of last year. And yeah, it raises some really, really serious questions, doesn't it? Like,
absolutely.
Not even the fact that the recommendation got ignored, but that then there's just a total like preference for secrecy rather than transparency, which is against the whole reason to be of the ACMD, right? But that's what makes it remarkable is that this is the only report that was never published. And yeah, it obviously highlights just this wider piece about why have independent expert advisors if you're not going to follow their advice. It's just obviously, yeah, being politicized, not just in terms of the advice, but even who gets appointed to the commission. I did a series of pieces highlighting how there'd been interference with the whole selection process, like people having their social media accounts vetted, like Neve Eastwood from Release, and basically being vetoed for expressing, very mild, like political positions on topics. Like some of her tweets about like supporting drug decrim were highlighted. Like so like if you support like the decriminalisation of drugs, you can't be on the committee. It just speaks to the fact that they just want yes people that support the government position.
Yeah.
And I think throughout the course of those stories, I like demonstrated that, and was glad to do so.
Yeah, no, I remember it when it was being released. There was lots of talk about it, and it was kind of a little bit of a bombshell. Kind of was my perception in terms of when people read it and heard about it. Absolutely, Mattha, I could chat to you, I think, for the next 2-3 hours. To be honest, there's so many different kind of questions that I want to ask you, but I won't keep you much longer. So your podcast what's your podcast called?
Unchartered Territory. Yeah, it's on Spotify and all the podcast platforms. And thanks very much for the interest in my work. I really appreciate it. And great stuff that you guys are doing at Barrod, and wish you all the best with it.
Yeah, thank you, Mattha. Yeah, so definitely check out your podcast. Definitely check out your book. Did I hear on Twitter that you are looking at maybe another book? Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, the folks at Hoxton Mini Press very kindly reached out to me, and they want to do kind of like a pocket guide, like maybe something about this size.
Okay, like A5, yeah?
Yeah, only about 10,000 words, but on psychedelics. So really excited for that, and it should be out in March of next year.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, I'll definitely watch out for that one. Mattha, I wish I could have done this in person with you in Vancouver, maybe next time. But Mattha, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you, coming on. And it's just been an absolute joy to chat to you and to listen to you. So thank you, Mattha.
Oh, thanks, Rob. Yeah, I appreciate it. And I hope to see you in person soon. And be great to keep in touch.
Cool. All right. Cheers, Mattha. Bye-bye. If you have been affected by any of the issues discussed in today's podcast, please reach out. Barrod have a free and confidential live web chat service that is available 7 days a week on our website at barrod.cymru, where you can chat to a trained support worker. Alternatively, you can contact Wales's National Drug and Alcohol Helpline, Dan 24/7, either by calling 0808 808 2234 or text Dan to 81066.